Harvey Weinstein, the notorious Hollywood film studio owner, the person behind a number of very popular films throughout decades, has been accused by dozens of women of sexual assault, sexual harassment, and in new allegations that were uncovered by Ronan Farrow in the New Yorker, rape. Now, the accounts that these women detail are incredibly detailed, and in a statement that he had released last week, he doesn't seem to deny cases of sexual harassment. However, he unequivocally denies that he ever raped anyone. However, I want to give you the details of what has been alleged, and we can get into other details later in the story. Now, according to Ronan Farrow's reporting in the New Yorker, in the course of a 10-month investigation, I was told by 13 women that between the 1990s and 2015, Weinstein sexually harassed or assaulted them, allegations that corroborate and overlap with the New York Times revelations and also include far more serious claims. Now, the story broke with the New York Times publishing an extensive piece detailing some of the allegations against Weinstein. And now, through the New Yorker, we know a little bit more about what allegedly happened. Weinstein and his associates used non-disclosure agreements, monetary payoffs, and legal threats to suppress these myriad stories. Asia Argento, an Italian film actress and director, told me that she did not speak out until now. Weinstein, she told me, forcibly performed oral sex on her because she feared that Weinstein would crush her. She was quoted as saying, "I know he has crushed a lot of people before. That's why this story, in my case, it's 20 years old. Some of them are older, has never come out." So a lot of these women have very similar stories where he would invite these women to dinner or to his hotel room, show up in a bathrobe, and then pressure them to give him naked massages. And then he would threaten them if they said that they would come out and share the details of what had happened.
So not only did he talk to 13 different women that were sexually harassed or assaulted, but he also talked to 16 former and current executives and assistants at Weinstein's companies. And they told countless stories of the same pattern. So like Bill Cosby had a pattern where he would drug women and then take advantage of them. Like Roger Ailes had a pattern of inviting women to a place where they would be alone and then saying, "I could either help your career or hurt your career." And in the endless cases that we've seen, Weinstein also had a pattern. He would, some people call a honey trap. He would get female executives or assistants to invite the women to the office, or sometimes at night to a hotel, so that they felt comfortable. Oh, there's going to be a woman there, or a woman is doing the inviting, and then he would have the woman sometimes be there in the beginning and then leave.
Exactly. So he would create an environment where women would feel comfortable meeting with him because they were under the assumption that a female executive would be there and that they wouldn't have to worry about any type of, risky behavior. But oftentimes what would happen is the female executive would be there momentarily and then she would, or temporarily I should say, and then once she left, that was when he allegedly would prey on these women. And much like the Bill Cosby allegations, these were all women who were just starting their careers. So they were looking to really establish themselves, and he used that as an opportunity to take advantage of them. Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie, two A-list celebrities who have absolutely nothing to gain from making anything up, have talked about their own experiences being sexually harassed by him.
Then there's giant stars like Ashley Judd, Mira Sorvino, Rosanna Arquette, but usually earlier in their careers.
Earlier in their careers, exactly. So Angelina Jolie said that she experienced sexual harassment and said that she would never work with him again. With Gwyneth Paltrow, I thought it was actually very interesting because she said she experienced similar sexual harassment and let Brad Pitt, her boyfriend at the time, know about it. Brad Pitt allegedly confronted Weinstein about these allegations, but it's unclear what happened after that.
But look, so in the old days, which are all the way up to now, okay, there's a lot of power in Hollywood. And so if you wanted access to celebrities, some of those powerful folks, whether they're the heads of studios, very powerful, not just directors and producers, but sometimes actors as well, could quash stories. I don't want to get into all the rumors of all the different stars and the stories that they've quashed. Some understandable, some not so understandable, because they want to protect their private lives. But when you get into an issue like this, Weinstein was one of the most notorious in wielding his power against his enemies or people that he felt crossed him. And also, by the way, doing right by the people who were on his side. I mean, if you're wondering why is this such a big deal and how did he have all this power? The movies that he helped put together have over 300 Oscar nominations. And things like Pulp Fiction and Crying Game, Shakespeare in Love, The King's Speech, and it goes on and on and on. And he has affected the careers of so many of these giant stars and made so many people so much money and given access to reporters at all those different levels, and hence their ability to influence people, and why that actress, among many others, thought they would be crushed if Harvey Weinstein wanted to get them.
Right, and I 100% believe that he would crush them, right? Because he had that kind of influence, he had that kind of power within the industry. And so, the same argument was made by us when we were covering Bill Cosby, and this takes the situation to a whole new level because Cosby, of course, had fame and fortune, but Weinstein had even more influence. And so if you are starting out, you're a young actress and you're confronted with these, sexual advances, if you deny those sexual advances, there's a fear. First of all, there's a power imbalance, right? So there's also a fear that there'll be retaliation for denying those advances. And then if you speak out, if you report it to the authorities, things could get even worse. And we actually have a specific example of that, okay? So there was a Filipina actress who experienced sexual harassment by Harvey Weinstein. Her name is Ambra Batilana Gutierrez. And apparently they crossed paths and he groped her breasts. She alleges he groped her breasts. She immediately went to the NYPD and let them know what happened, and they put together a sting operation. And through that sting operation, they were able to obtain the following audio. Listen closely.
I'm telling you right now.
What do we have to do here?
Nothing. I'm gonna take a shower. You sit there and have a drink. Water.
I don't drink.
Then have
Can
a
I
glass of
stay
water.
on the bar?
No, you must come here now.
No.
Please.
No, I don't want to.
I'm not doing anything with you. I'm
I
now
know,
you're
I
embarrassing me.
I'm sorry, I
No,
cannot.
come in
No,
here.
yesterday was a kind of aggressive for
I
me.
know-
I need to know a person to
I
be
won't
touched.
do a thing.
I don't want
Do a thing, please. I swear I won't. Just sit with me. Don't embarrass me in the hotel. I'm here all the time.
I
Sit
know,
with me.
but
I
I don't
promise.
want to.
Please sit there. Please. 1 minute.
No,
I
I
ask
can't.
you. Go to the bathroom.
Please, I don't want to do something I don't want
Go
to.
to the bathroom. Come here. Listen to me.
I want to go downstairs.
I'm not going to do anything. You'll never see me again after this. Okay? That's it. If you embarrass me in this hotel,
I'm not
I'll stay.
embarrassing you. It's just that I don't feel comfortable.
Honey, don't have a fight with me in the
It's not
hall.
nice.
Please, I'm not going to do anything. I swear, my children. Please come in. On everything. I'm a famous guy.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable right
Please
now.
come in now. And 1 minute. And if you want to leave, when the guy comes with my
Why
jacket, you can go.
yesterday you touched my breast?
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on. I'm used to that. Come on.
Are you used to that?
Yes, come in.
No, but I'm not used to
I
that.
won't do it again. Come on. Sit here.
So he confessed to groping her breasts in that audio, right? And the NYPD decided not to press charges against him because of a lack of evidence, which I think is pretty incredible.
When Gutierrez went to the police, all of a sudden, negative items about her sexual history began popping up in the gossip pages in New York papers. What an interesting coincidence that happened. This is my main issue with Bill Clinton back in the day. Look, I don't think that a guy should have been impeached over oral sex that was consensual, but the way that he went after Monica Lewinsky was disgusting. And he impugned her character, pretended that she was crazy, and they did a character assassination of her. Yeah, politics, right? But that's dirty politics. And so that was deeply disturbing back then. And I criticized the National Organization of Women back then for not being nearly aggressive enough in criticizing Bill Clinton. Now, in this case, here we have Harvey Weinstein, whatever you want to call him, pretending to be a liberal or actually being a liberal on other issues, guns, whatever, right? But in his personal life, doing these disgusting things, and then not only pressuring them, you heard it for yourself there, and that's a small part of it. That doesn't even have, that's not among the worst cases. But on top of that, you saw him there cajole her with like, hey, if you don't come in now, that's it. I won't be able to talk to you anymore. In other words, you're not going to get any more jobs. And some of those bigger actresses like Sorvino and Arquette said yes, that there were punishments and that they lost jobs either with his company, and that they believe he would talk about them to others and prevent them from getting jobs. To use your power to crush the powerless while you're preying on them, and then when they don't go along with you, to do it publicly, it doesn't get worse than
right,
that.
the character assassination. And that's exactly what happened with Gutierrez. And she ended up settling with him out of court, which there's evidence that there were as many as 8 settlements out of court to kind of hush these women up. And she also signed a non-disclosure agreement, which indicates that she can't really talk to the press about what happened. So this is the kind of intimidation tactic that he used with all of these different women, and now the story is really coming to light.
So yeah, just quick updates because there's so many layers to this story. So the original New York Times story has the 8 women and the settlements, and then there is the female reporter that said that she was captured in basically in a hallway. You've got the exact quotes there, Anna?
I have the exact portion of Ronan's reporting that states what happened, okay? There was a local news reporter, and apparently she was at a restaurant with him, and he had her cornered and tried to make sexual advances. She denied those sexual advances, and at that point he began to masturbate in front of her and ejaculated in front of her. I believe in a potted plant.
Yes, that's right. So he did the same thing where he's like, here, let me show you around. Just come with me, just come with me. He takes her to the kitchen. There's other people in the kitchen, it looks fine. But then he tells the people in the kitchen to leave. Then they're leaving the kitchen, and now she's stuck in a hallway where she can't get past them to get back into the kitchen and out. And so she's stuck there. And first he asks her to participate. She won't. Then he says, then just shut up and stand there. And he does what he's going to do. And the reason it seemed like he was inviting the other woman that you heard on tape is because sometimes what he did is he would have them watch him shower. I mean, the arrogance of folks is amazing.
But he got away with it for so long, for decades, right? And what's amazing is that it was like this dirty little secret. Like people had rumors about him, they had heard the rumors about him. He had a reputation. Look, I don't follow Hollywood at all. I barely even know what's out in theaters. So I was completely unaware. I didn't even, to keep it real, I didn't even know who Harvey Weinstein was, okay?
Wow, okay.
I know, I'm bad, but I just don't care about that world.
You're not in the movie business.
Not even a little bit. But for those who are in that industry and are in that business, it was like this rumor, this known reputation that no one really wanted to dig into.
And the reason why these stories snowball is because, as Ronan Farrow puts out in the piece, look, this is not our original reporting. It's the New Yorker, Ronan Farrow, and New York Times did a great job with this. So, and what Ronan said is, he's so powerful that it's really hard to get people to say it on the record because they've seen careers ruined. So, but after one story comes out, then they feel liberated and go, yes, I'll go on the record, yes, or on background, but I'll tell you exactly what happened, because they get a sense, okay, he's done, so he can't hurt us anymore.
Exactly, yeah, so it kind of opens the floodgates, because that level of intimidation doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and so we saw that same pattern with Roger Ailes too. He would threaten your career, and as long as he was in power, he could and sometimes did end your career, and a lot of actors are saying this, the reason they didn't say anything, they claim, is one, it was rumors, so they couldn't corroborate it, and they're not journalists, and they couldn't go out and make public statements unless they knew for a fact, right? And number two, they thought that the rumors were not that he was sexually assaulting them, it's that they were willing participants,
right? And
they didn't want to smear the actresses by spreading those rumors around, because it might ruin their career if people thought that's how they got their job.
Right, so that was what George Clooney told the Daily Beast in an interview. He said, like, I thought, all right, he's using his position of power to convince women to sleep with him, but they're willing participants in that.
And that he was afraid that that was going to negatively affect their career if you go talking about that. Look, you can make that whatever you want. You could say they should have been more courageous. They should have investigated. They shouldn't have worked with him. And that's all fair points. I think getting into the nitty gritty of blaming everyone who knew Harvey Weinstein is not productive at all. Because they didn't do this and they had no idea the degree to which they were doing. They weren't there with him in the potted plant. So for people who knew, some fought back, some didn't, and don't blame the victims either. So it appears based on this reporting, we know who did it. He's been fired from his own company. The company apparently is going to even change the name because it's called the Weinstein Company.
Right.
He started with his brother Bob, and so his career appears to be over. And if these stories are correct, it's about time. And I wish that the reporters were able to get these stories out earlier, because he kept doing it, they say, until 2015. So if they had actually reported it 10 years ago when they had some of the story, it might have saved a decade of further sexual harassment and potentially assault. Support independent media. Come join us at the Young Turks. TYTnetwork.com/join.